Hi there, my name's Freya. I'm the Operations and Commercial Officer here at National Centre for Writing. We are a literature organisation based at Dragon Hall in Norwich. We work within several areas within the literary sphere. We work with young people and vulnerable adults, running courses and workshops. We work in the kind of artistic festival sphere and do a lot of international work. And we do translation and reading projects. We also are based here at Dragon Hall, which involves a lot of my job, which is our venue and our office space. So I work within human resources, events operations and building management, and then general resources. So how that works within the wider organisation is basically looking after the building, making sure that events run smoothly and safely, doing contracts and things for people that work in the organisation, and ordering paper, coffee, that kind of thing. So we basically look after the building. We're in a very beautiful space called Dragon Hall. It's a 15th century medieval merchant hall. And there's obviously some beautiful kind of spaces around the building that we work with, but they also have some challenges. So we need to make sure that when we're helping the program team to run their events, that they're doing it safely and effectively, that they're doing it in line with building regulations, because we are a listed building. So there are some really specific rules around the care of the building that we have to adhere to, that we are inclusive, that the people that attend our events feel safe and secure. And that's a huge part of how we fit into the wider organisation. Equally, I am personally very interested in event production. So a large part of my role is thinking about sound requirements, visual requirements, things like cameras and we've got an integrated PA system, so I've had to learn how to use that and those kind of elements. So I think in terms of my professional development, the areas that I will move into are probably some more training within those kind of technical production elements, to help better assist us as the National Centre for Writing in having really effective, interesting events. We're used to having, a writer on stage with a microphone, and now we're moving forward to being able to use much more interesting light displays or installations that involve a lot more logistical and operational input. And those are the areas that I want to invest in my training to be able to facilitate that. So at school, I studied English literature and art and all the kind of main subjects that you would do. And I went on to a sixth form college for which I studied English literature, English language and visual art. I also did a AS year in music technology, which is why I have some skills in learning, in using our technical equipment here at Dragon Hall. I then went on to university. I went to the University of Cumbria in the Lake District and studied English literature. This is probably where I gained a lot of my useful experience for the working world, and where I would recommend that if you're wanting to explore the arts and getting into the arts, I would really dip your toe into as much as you can while at university. So whilst there, I did some voluntary work with Lancaster Lit Fest. I also did several kind of academic events within the Department of English at the university. And I set up a English society. Now, most universities already have an English society, so it's hard to actually have that opportunity on your CV for most places. But I was quite lucky, for me anyway, that at the time we didn't. So myself and some people within the university set up an English society, which gave me some really useful experience to working within events and within literary events specifically. Following university, I moved back to Norfolk and did some just casual work in shops and bars for a while I worked out what to do, which is a really useful time. And a lot of people come away from university thinking, what should I do? And feeling quite bad about that. But it's a very useful time for working out what your next step is. So don't allow yourself to be beaten down by the fear after university. And then I applied for a scheme called the Western Jerwood Creative Bursary Scheme, which was a means-tested training programme for those who received the full grant and loan at university, so people who are essentially from working class backgrounds, to gain really useful intern-level experience in an arts organisation. And the purpose of that was to get people who might not be able to do unpaid internships into those opportunities to allow them to work within the arts. So that was a year long, and I was placed at the National Centre for Writing and have been here for the last 5 years in many different iterations at NCW. I'd always been interested in literature and visual art at school, so anything creative, textile art, visual art, literature, English literature and language were really big for me. Media studies was also something I was reasonably interested in. In my other kind of world that isn't National Centre for Writing based, I do metalworking and illustration, so I'm a very artsy person and I always knew I wanted to work in that kind of environment. But when I went to university, I had some really great experiences that taught me a little bit more about what's available out there. So when you think of literature and when you think of the arts, you think of the really obvious kind of careers that you can go into, like teaching or becoming an illustrator or becoming an artist or becoming a writer. But you don't necessarily know the more offbeat careers that are a part of the arts sphere. So I was really lucky to do some work experience with a literature festival up in Lancaster called Lancaster Lit Fest. And that was basically just helping where I could, doing kind of events work, helping them kind of flyer, that kind of thing. And it really taught me about the kind of jobs that are out there in the arts that you could get involved with, specifically arts administration for events. I'd always kind of considered teaching as a potential career option. So then learning about the kind of job that you can do that's a little bit more hands-on and gives you the opportunity to meet some famous writers and creators was really appealing to me. So that's kind of what changed my trajectory from teaching into something more admin-based. And I haven't really looked back since. I think a big part of the role is basically learning to be flexible. You're the kind of person in an operations team that has to wear many hats. And therefore, one minute you can be meeting and greeting a really famous writer like Margaret Atwood. And then the next you can be kind of moving and hauling furniture around a building, or kind of having to direct someone to a lift or something a bit less glamorous. So in terms of training for my specific role, over the years I've had a good amount of training in really specific areas that relate to my job role. There are some things that you can kind of learn on the job and some things that are really transferable from things that you do elsewhere. So before I kind of moved into the arts, I had a few years working in bars and pubs and things during university, and some of the skills that you learn there are absolutely applicable to the things that you do in a job like this. Things like being customer facing, having a good kind of attention to detail, that kind of thing. But in terms of specific training, when it comes to more legislative, so legal documentation, contract writing, that kind of thing, there are some really important skills that have to be honed there to make sure that you're writing technically and that you're writing within the law. So I've had some HR and contract writing sort of training there, and they're only in the form of 1 or 2 day courses that are normally promoted by the organisation you work for to kind of make sure that you can do the job properly. So it's not necessarily something you have to go out and go, well, if I want to do this job, I need to sign myself up for a course. Not necessarily. You'll find a lot of these things come along the way, but so I've had some HR training. A really big one for me, and a really huge part of my role is surrounding equality and diversity. So that's from both the human resources perspective, which involves things like recruitment. So when we put out applications for new jobs in the organisation, we obviously have to record our equality data to make sure that we're getting out to the right people and that we're being as open as an organisation as we can. So there's a huge part of that is revolved around my role. But likewise, the event side of my role, which is probably the more interesting side of my role, involves a lot of equality and diversity thinking and planning, in particular accessibility. So a big part of my role is thinking about how could someone with access needs enter this space, and how could somebody with neurodifference feel that they are welcome within our events, and how can we accommodate them. So I've had some really specific training around those areas to make sure that the things that we do at National Centre for Writing are as open and welcoming to all walks of life, basically. I think the university path is definitely a sure way to get into a role like this. I don't think it's the only way. So there are some skills and attributes that you learn at university that are really very useful to getting into the arts. We've got a pool of duty managers here that we work with. So duty managers are basically event managers that come and look after the space, and they're responsible for the events while we're out of hours. So when we're not in the building, they run our events for us. And they're in charge of health and safety. They're in charge of the effective management of the event, and they're in charge of the building safety and security. Now, many of the people that we work with from our duty manager pool don't have degrees. Many do as well. But many don't, and working within facilities management and event management doesn't necessarily require you to have a degree. So there are other ways that you can go into that. For instance, a way to get into facilities management would obviously be doing experience within a heritage building, or doing any kind of work experience within a museum or that kind of thing. Or if you wanted to get event experience, you could work within the events industry. You could obviously gain really useful experience as a runner at events or weddings. And that will allow you to have the very similar skill set to do certain parts of this role. The element that I think is harder to do without a university education is the HR side of things. Just because the written skills that you learn in a university setting really allow you to be quite precise in your writing for things that are like legal documents or kind of outward-facing print or media. They really allow you to have those skills by going to university. So it's absolutely not necessity, but I think it's very useful. It also just gives you the time and space to think about your experience and to think about what it is you want to do. So I would recommend it from that perspective, but it's not a definite. So I would definitely recommend, if you're going into an operations role, really explore how can-do you can be, because it's the kind of role that involves being able to shift your focus in a moment's notice. That's probably the best advice I'd give for something like that. Likewise, it is a really logistical role. It takes a good amount of forward planning and a really keen eye for detail. And one thing that I had to learn as I started in this organisation and in this role in particular was actually to slow down. If you're doing something that involves a lot of kind of making sure there are no trip hazards around a building, or making sure that a contract you've written isn't incorrect in any way, rushing things is just not going to work. You need to make sure that you're systematic and slow, slowing down at least, and that you're being succinct in how you do things. I think I would say that specifically an operations role in the arts industry, if you're the kind of person that loves several things within the arts and culture sector, or even in the arts in general. So if you're the kind of person that enjoys writing and reading and drawing and creating and playing music and have little bits of skills in many areas, you may be suited to something like operations. It's the kind of role where having a breadth of skills is really useful, because, as I said, you kind of have to change your hat depending on what your day looks like.